Greetings, fellow travelers, vagrants, explorers, wildlanders, and welcome to episode 52 of the Retro Wildlands. My name is Nomad, and this is my gaming podcast where I like to share my thoughts and experiences with a video game that I have discovered or rediscovered while roaming the gaming wildlands. Thank you very much for tuning into the show today. Even though I'm not posting new episodes as often as I would like, it has been fun watching our download numbers as of late. I can always tell when someone discovers the show for the first time because I'll see a bunch of downloads that are all over the place in a very short amount of time. I always assumed that was someone just going through the backlog, and it's pretty cool when I get to see it. So whether this is your first journey into the Wildlands with us, or you're just jumping through the backlog, I'm really glad you decided to spend some time with us today. Dee, our canine expedition leader, has been, well, to be quite frank, he's been up my ass a lot in the last few weeks, and he's super excited for us to get back to the Wildlands and have some people along with us. I was away a few weeks ago on a work trip to Orlando for my job, and according to my wife, he did not take my absence super well. He wasn't losing his mind or tearing up the furniture or anything, but he was moping around quite a bit. Even with my wife and the kids around, Dee was just blah. I sometimes feel the same way when I'm on work trips. While I'm surrounded by coworkers and other familiar faces, my work trips can feel a bit isolating. But where Dee tends to sink into melancholy, I tend to thrive on being sent away somewhere alone. It can be pretty daunting and sometimes a little intimidating, but as I get settled in for the week, I'll gain a little more confidence as I get a lay of the land and gather up some resources to help me through it all. And by resources, I usually mean a pile of junk food and a bottle of bourbon from the local liquor store. And by the time I've conquered my purpose for being there, I'll leave wherever I'm at and head home. Usually a little stronger or maybe a little wiser, while I wait a year for my next mission where I'll be sent off again into parts unknown. It can be an exhilarating feeling, all things considered, and why I think most gamers really hold an appreciation for the game that we're going to be talking about today. On today's episode, we're checking out a video game that many people consider to be the best, period. To loosely quote Brett the Hitman Hart, this game is the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. It's an action-adventure game with emphasis on exploration and open-ended gameplay that established and helped create the Metroidvania genre video games. And while I think most gamers know of this particular game's legacy and impact on the industry as a whole, it wasn't until I finally played it that I think it all really makes sense to me personally. This game took a pretty simple concept on paper and created a gameplay experience like none other. But it also found a way to continue to be relevant some 30 years after its initial release. That's because, even though you can technically finish the game, you're never really done with it. There's many secrets to discover as you play and ways to play this game that continually pump the experience full of new life. You can take the slow, methodical path or the fast and efficient one. The choice is ultimately yours, and when you play a game that allows you freedom like this, it's no secret why so many people think so highly of this game. It's special to them because the experience has been tailor-made based on how they choose to play. While the end point is more or less the same, it's how you get to it, and the tools we use along the way that define the journey on the individual level. Couple all of that with a gritty, isolating atmosphere and some top-notch sound design, you have yourself the makings of a must-have experience. And it is an experience that I have finally taken. Today, on the Retro Wildlands, we are going to be diving in to Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo. I have an interesting history with Super Metroid, and it's one that I didn't really remember until I started this podcast project of mine and went back down memory lane. While the Super Nintendo was the main gaming console in my household for several years, Super Metroid was not a game I had the pleasure of playing when I was a kid. I know, it sounds sacrilegious at this point. I remembered recently that we did actually rent it at one point, but I never got a chance to really dive into this game. There was a save file on the cartridge at the very end of the game, and I got to play through the game's spectacular ending, but that was about it. Somewhere along the lines, I had acquired the Super Metroid Player's Guide published by Nintendo. That guide was a complete run-through of the game and detailed information on enemies you'd face and all the awesome power-ups that you could collect. For as many times as I read that book cover to cover, I could say that I actually played the game for real. But now that I'm older and we're on this journey of checking out retro games that I missed out on, it was only a matter of time before Super Metroid made its way onto the show. But, to be honest with all of you, while I was already convinced of Super Metroid's impact on people and that it was an iconic game, I was curious if this game is still fun to play today. I mean, I don't really hear anyone talking negatively about this game, and I often wondered if it was just the nostalgia talking. Was Super Metroid a game that truly holds up 30 years later, or has everyone just been blinded by the warm and bright nostalgia rays? Well, my friends, the time has come for me to share with you my thoughts and experiences with Super Metroid now that I've played it through, and I can promise you one thing. No punches are going to be pulled today. We're going to see how well this game holds up as we join Samus on her lonely, isolated journey to planet Zebes to recover the last Metroid in existence. Now, if you're new to the show, I like to kick things off by chatting it up with you all for a little bit and giving you all a peek behind the scenes here in the Retro Wildlands before getting into the meat of the episode itself. Depending on what's on my mind, I like to talk about what's going on with the podcast itself, what games I might be playing, what's going on in my personal life, any projects I'm working on, and whatever else pops up. I'll also use this time to read and respond to any comments I received about Super Metroid when I put a call out for them on our social media pages. Now, if none of this interests you and you just came here for my Super Metroid thoughts, no worries. You can skip ahead about 20 to 25 minutes and you should get into the game talk. I'll also have timestamps loaded into the show's description if you want to know exactly where you need to go and you don't want to fumble around with your podcast app. Though I certainly encourage you to stick around. We're going to settle in with a little gaming talk, and you'll get to hear your fellow Wildlanders sound off with their thoughts and memories. So, without further delay, cozy up by the campfire, my friends. Let's get into our opening segment that I like to call Campfire Catchup. So my last few weeks, and well, really my entire month actually, has been pretty eventful. I mentioned this earlier, and I think I touched on it last episode, but I recently got shipped off to Orlando, Florida for a work trip. I worked Friday through Wednesday, flying home on Thursday, and it was all nonstop. While I love the fact that my job will ship me to places all over the United States once a year, this time of year is the busiest at my job, and I'm finding myself putting in 9 or 10-hour days consistently. No real complaints, don't get me wrong. I'm fortunate enough to have a job that pays the bills, but that obviously leaves me very little time to game and focus on the podcast. However, despite the time away, I was able to knock some games off my backlog, even a few modern games that I've been chipping away at. I think I mentioned this last episode, but I finally completed The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and had a fantastic time all the way around. I'm eager to get my hands on Tears of the Kingdom, and while it sorta sucks to be playing these games long after most gamers have probably finished them and moved on from them ages ago, I'm glad to be finally experiencing them, and it'll be fun to be able to jump in some conversations about them. While I did play a decent amount of Super Metroid on my Switch through the Nintendo Online service, I actually played a lot of Super Mario Wonder on the plane ride to Orlando. Because of that, I felt compelled to just stick with Wonder and finish that one out. Which is exactly what I did. So on the second to last day of my work trip, while sitting on my hotel balcony in 70-degree weather, I finished Super Mario Wonder. While I don't have as many Mario games under my belt as I would like up to this point, I was very impressed with Wonder, and I think anyone who likes Mario or just good games in general should definitely give it a go. It wasn't a perfect experience by any stretch, and I do have some qualms about a few little things here and there. Overall, it was a fun experience. I won't spoil the ending or anything, but I specifically loved the final battle at the end. The whimsical nature of Wonder is what made it so fun for me, so it was even funner to throw that out the window and have the game embrace Bowser and his wickedly evil ways by the end when it came to the battle itself and the music that was playing. I didn't 100% complete the game, but I got a large chunk of the Wonder Seeds, standees, and badges. I'll go back to this one at one point, I am sure, but for right now, Super Mario Wonder is done and done. I also decided to grab a copy of Mario vs. Donkey Kong on the Nintendo Switch and give that one a go. Since I've really gotten into the Switch over the last year or so, I'm trying to play as many Nintendo exclusives as I can to get myself caught up. The new Mario v DK game is a remaster of the original, which came out on the Game Boy Advance back in 2004, and it always looked interesting to me. I am not one for puzzle games, really, but the simple premise definitely seemed like it would be a little bit of fun. Mario gets dropped into a level and there's a locked door that he needs to get through in order to move on. Somewhere in the level is the key to that locked door. You need to manipulate blocks, switches, and avoid enemies while you find a way to get the key to the door so you can keep moving forward. Reviews online mention that this game wasn't all that long, maybe 4 to 8 hours, depending on how complete you want to get the game, so I figured it would be a decent game to grab for my trip. What really cemented the deal was the fact that my local retro game store is now getting copies of new games, so when I saw Mario vs. DK on the shelves at their location, that sealed it. I didn't completely finish the game until a few days after I got home from my work trip, but I can successfully add that to my list of completed games for 2024. All in all, Mario vs. Donkey Kong was a pretty good experience. The problem that I have with the game is that there really isn't much meat on the proverbial bone, so to speak. Plus, the game's difficulty curve was a little out of whack as well, at least it was to me. While I'm not a puzzler, I felt like the game was way too easy for about 60% of its levels. By the time the game really got going, I was starting to get bored of it. Still, I completed the game just shy of 100%, and I was pretty satisfied overall. I just don't think there was enough there to justify the $50 that I spent on it. And I'm not talking about overall playtime. I can't remember where I heard it, but someone described this game as being lacking in overall substance, and I think I agree with that logic. Still, I think it's one that you should play if you're at all interested in puzzle games. I'd give it a solid 7 out of 10, but now that I'm done with it, I probably will not be going back to this one. You know what? That reminds me. As I complete games this year, even if I don't plan on covering them on the show, I'm gonna try to start leaving a brief summary of my thoughts on our social media pages. It's been fun getting other people's thoughts and perspectives on games, so I'm trying to get more of that out of our social media presence. If that's something that mildly interests you, or you just want to add some video game spice to your timelines and feeds, you should check out the Retro Wildlands on social media, if you haven't already. We have a link tree that you can go to at linktr.ee/Retro Wildlands, and that will link you to our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, Threads, and even Blue Sky pages. I do my best to remain active there, and I pride myself on replying to most comments, so give us a follow on any of those platforms if you're at all interested. Plus, whenever I'm actively writing a script for a new episode of the show, I'll put a call out for comments or questions to be read on the upcoming episode on our social media pages, so if you ever wanted to have something read on the show, that's how you can do it. So, speaking of games I'm playing that I don't think I'll cover on the show, I have a few modern games that I'm trying to juggle right now, and they all seem to just fall in my lap all at once. First up, I got my hands on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and holy shit, was this game exactly what I was hoping for. I didn't think I was going to have a PlayStation 5 by the time this game launched, but by the time I got one and thought to pre-order this game, I missed out on the physical collector's edition and the physical deluxe edition. Which, in retrospect, is probably a good thing considering what they cost, but I did get Rebirth the day after I came back from my work trip. I'm not too far into it, but I am having an absolute blast so far. For anyone that's played the game so far that knows, I'm in the grasslands, and I just unlocked the ability to ride a chocobo. Right now, I'm just wandering around and trying to get used to the new additions to the battle system, and all in all though, I'm quite happy with this game, and I'm sure I'll be plugging away at it whenever I can. However, my wife inadvertently got me interested in Hogwarts Legacy of all games, and now I'm pretty invested in that one too. It's funny, when I got the PlayStation 5 from her for Christmas, I made it a point to purchase Hogwarts more so for her since she's a bigger Harry Potter fan than I think I'll ever be. She finally decided to play it while I was away on my work trip, and when I came home and watched her messing around with it, it immediately caught my attention. She's not much of a gamer, really, but she was having fun exploring and unlocking new things. At one point, I created my own character, and as soon as I started playing, I was hooked. This game makes you feel like you're progressing in some capacity all the time, and when a game respects the time that I put into it like that, it is an instant hit for me. At this moment, I'm not very far into the game, but I've made some good progress. I'm committed to finishing Hogwarts at some point, but therein lies my current problem. I cannot balance two massive games like Rebirth and Hogwarts, so I need to choose one. I think Hogwarts would be the quicker experience, but I know if I really get into Rebirth, I can kiss any other game goodbye for a very long time. Plus, people are already being jerks and posting plot spoilers for Rebirth on the internet, and I'm starting to get little bits and pieces of the story spoiled for me. So, Rebirth is probably where I need to put my focus, but as per usual, I'm just gonna follow my heart on this one. Now, beyond those games, I also decided to grab Helldivers 2, and holy crap, is that game awesome! It is the talk of the gaming world right now, and while I don't really have a squad of friends to play this game with, I have a blast either on my own or with a group of random people. I played the original Helldivers a lot on my PlayStation Vita, so I would like to keep diving into the sequel wherever I could find time to do that. At the moment, I am only a level 5 diver and not contributing too much to the Galactic War, but I'm hoping to change that in the near future as well. And finally, I wanted to work through a shorter game on my Switch whenever I had a few minutes to kill here and there. So I decided to pop in Double Dragon Gaiden, and so far I am having a pretty decent time with that one. It's a beat-em-up, just like the older Double Dragon games, but it has some roguelite gimmicks that keep the gameplay fresh. I've only put in maybe a couple hours into this one, but overall I am liking it. It's a great pick-up-and-play sort of experience, and the retro aesthetic really speaks to me. We'll see how I feel down the road, but for something smaller, Double Dragon Gaiden is hitting the spot for now. Other than that, I think that's really all I have going on around here. Oh, I do have one more quick thing. I did get a chance to appear on a couple podcasts recently as a guest, if you're interested in checking those out. I can't remember for the life of me if I mentioned this one last episode, but I returned to the Waffling Tailors podcast, where I joined Jay and his brother Squidge to talk about the Resident Evil 2 remake. That was a really good time, and you should check it out if you're looking for a fun, yet informative discussion about one of the best remakes out there. I also joined back up with Aaron over at the SuperPod Saga podcast, where I talked about video games that I loved that people actually hated. I was joined by a few other gentlemen, and we went around the horn dropping games and talking all about them. I love hanging out with Aaron on that show because it is a perfect forum to let my hair down a little and get a little wild. So if you're interested in either checking those episodes out or you want to check out some new podcasting content, check out the Waffling Tailors and the SuperPod Saga. Googling them will actually be your fastest way to find them, as they both have their own websites, but they're available on most podcasting platforms. Check them out, and if you do, please let them know that Nomad sent you. Okay, now I think that is actually all I've got for today as far as catching you up goes. Lots of gaming happening in my neck of the woods, but for now, let's transition into talking about the one that you're all here for today. It's time to talk about Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo. We received a handful of comments from the Wildlands community on Super Metroid, so let's rip through some of those and set the scene for the awesomeness to come. First up, we have Brando, who chimed in over on our Twitter/X page. They said, Super Metroid is my all-time favorite game. Even though I've played through it multiple times, it never gets old for me. I could pick it up right now and still feel the same joy with it as when I played through it nearly 30 years ago. I just find every aspect of it to be stellar. If it's not apparent to some, this right here is why Super Metroid is so special to people. It takes a special game to make us feel this way, and I love that this game is like this for you, Brando. The awesome thing is, now that I've played through this game, I think I can see a lot of what makes this game special to you. Gameplay is tight, the game's atmosphere is spot on, and all of the game's items and abilities add layer upon layer to the overall experience. For me, Final Fantasy VII is that sort of game for me since I spent so much time with it when I was younger. The opening music, the feeling I get during the first battle sequence. I have to imagine it's the same for you when Samus is heading to Cirrus Station to respond to that initial distress call. Thanks for writing in, Brando, and I hope I do your favorite game justice on the show today. Next up, we have a comment from the SuperPod Saga podcast, so I'm assuming this is Aaron doing the speaking. He wrote in over on our Twitter/X page and said, The soundtrack to the game is so good. They perfectly matched the environments with the ambient sound/music and made this totally eerie and unexplored feeling in the atmosphere. So sick. Yes, I'm glad someone wrote in about the soundtrack to this game. Super Metroid perfectly captures that atmosphere of isolation and loneliness. Samus might be a badass bounty hunter, but the world she's on is full of things trying to kill her. Resources and abilities are limited, and until you encounter a threat, you really don't know the extent of it. More so, it's just you down there, and there's no help coming. You have to explore and brave the world's dangers to proceed, and the game's music perfectly captures that feeling of isolation and dread. While I personally don't think this game's soundtrack is that good to the point that I have it on my Spotify playlist or anything, there are some good tunes to be had here, and they do their job perfectly. Thank you very much for the comment, Aaron, and by the way, this one's for you, buddy. Staying on Twitter, our next comment came from Robert Amb. Or is it Robamb? Robert has this to say. Despite growing up alongside the Metroid franchise, I truly never played any until Dread. I remember Samus from Super Smash Bros., but that was the extent of my Metroid experience. Too bad, because I fell in love with Dread and Prime Remastered. I need to play the older titles. My friend, there is certainly no shame in any of that. If it wasn't for this podcast, I would not have played any Metroid games up to this point. I did enjoy playing as Samus in Super Smash, but she was just a passing fancy for me. And while I do own a physical copy of Metroid Dread and have heard nothing but amazing things about that game, I haven't cracked it open yet either. If you ever find the time, I think Super Metroid or even Metroid Zero Mission would be the perfect older Metroid games to start out with. At least that's where I started, and I've had some great times with both titles. The beautiful thing about gaming is it is never too late to jump into something new to you, regardless of how old the game is. Thank you very much for the comment, my friend, and if you do jump into any older Metroid game, let me know what you decide on. I'd genuinely be curious. Next up, we have Chris Copleen, who is one half of the Retro Hangover podcast. He spoke up on Twitter and said, "Hate to say it, I don't care for this game. Is it better than the first one? Yes. But it still has too many elements of blowing up everything to find a secret for my taste. But I think there's a reason that Metroidvania wasn't coined until the Vania part perfected it." I really appreciate this comment, Chris, and for as much as I have been and will sing the praises of Super Metroid, I do share a bit of the sentiment. I don't think I really mentioned this in the episode itself, but I did start to tire of looking for things in the environments that I could destroy with the right item or find that secret passage that was hidden in plain sight. There's certainly a novelty to it, and there's a nice hit of dopamine when you do find something hidden, but that magic faded for me over time. Speaking of the Vania part of the Metroidvania style game, I do find myself wondering which of the two extremes I prefer. Metroid-centric games are great because I love the idea of coming across an inaccessible area, finding the thing that I need to progress somewhere else, and then using said thing to open up more of the game world. Simple idea, very engaging. But the Vania portion of the equation is what I think I prefer. And when I think Vania, I think those RPG elements like gaining experience to level up and finding better equipment to boost your stats. There were a couple times I got lost in Super Metroid, and it frustrated me a little because I always want to feel like my time is being used towards something. When I played Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the show, I found myself lost a lot, but at least I was taking out enemies and at least gaining experience or finding new items along the way. My time was not completely wasted. Still, it takes two halves to make a whole, and Super Metroid undoubtedly contributed its half near perfectly in my opinion. Thanks for reaching out to the show, Chris. Always a pleasure to hear from you, friend. Our last comment today comes from William over on our Facebook page. He said, "Hope you talk about the creator of Metroid, Gunpei Yokoi. Interesting but tragic story." Gunpei Yokoi was a name I know I've heard of in my retro gaming travels, but it wasn't until I took the time to read a bit about him did I realize who he actually was and the impact that he had on gaming as a whole. He worked for Nintendo for many years, long before they started making video games. It wasn't until 1974 that Yokoi started working on games. He was one of the first game designers at Nintendo, and one of the first things he helped bring to life was the Game & Watch handheld gaming device. One day Yokoi was on a train and saw a passenger messing with their LCD calculator, and he thought to himself, wouldn't it be cool to combine an LCD watch and a video game? Thus, the Game & Watch was born. Yokoi also created the cross-shaped directional pad and put that into use on the Game & Watch systems. Obviously, the directional pad design is still going very strong today. Later down the road, Yokoi would join Nintendo's first research and development team, otherwise known as R&D1. Through this team, Yokoi helped develop some awesome titles like Kid Icarus, Dr. Mario, Duck Hunt, Fire Emblem, and, you guessed it, Metroid. R&D1 also produced the original Game Boy. Not every creation was a banger though, as Yokoi had also helped with the design for the Virtual Boy. This system, some believe, was just a little too far ahead of its time, but regardless, it was a commercial failure. Shortly after this, Yokoi left Nintendo, not because the Virtual Boy bombed, but because he formed a new company called Koto Laboratory. Here, he helped lead the development of the Bandai WonderSwan handheld console, but unfortunately, Gunpei Yokoi never saw its release. On October 4th, 1997, Yokoi was killed in an automobile accident. I had read that the car he was driving in accidentally rear-ended a truck, and when he and the person he was riding with went to inspect the damage, Yokoi was hit by a passing vehicle. He was gravely injured on the spot, and he ended up passing away a few hours later. It was such a huge loss, and makes me shake my head just thinking about it. This man brought so much creativity forth. The directional pad, the Game Boy, the Game & Watch, all of which still influence this hobby of ours even today and will continue for generations to come. Super Metroid is a great example of a continued legacy, so while some people may no longer be with us on this earth, their influences can be felt everywhere, and I think Super Metroid is a great game to talk about in that regard. Released in North America on April 18th, 1994, Super Metroid was a game that would help define video games for generations to come. It was a side-scrolling action-adventure game where players were given the freedom to explore an alien world however they saw fit. The only things that would hold you back on your mission to find the last Metroid were your lack of equipment and your inability to allow yourself to get lost while you explore. Both problems can be overcome, and once they are, the game continually opens up for the player. While Super Metroid may not have been the first game made with open-ended exploration in mind, it's one of the first that really got it right. The sense of progression you feel as a player as you gain new abilities and items was unmatched for the time, and this approach to gameplay really made the experience tailorable to the player. No longer was the objective to get a high score or make it to the end of a level. You were on a mission to recover the last Metroid, and the game wasn't going to hold your hand and tell you exactly how to do it. The time had come for many players to be what they always wanted to be: an explorer, an adventurer, or even a bounty hunter. So what's it going to be, Wildlanders? What do you want to be today? The road to adventure can be full of excitement and wonder, or it can be full of isolation and dread. But no matter what route we take, there's one thing that is abundantly clear. The last Metroid isn't going to save itself, and it's going to be up to us to do what's necessary to get it back. If there was any point in my life where I think it was that video games really started to make an impact on my life, I think it really started when I was around 4 or maybe 5 years old. I'm having a hard time remembering exactly, but there was a point where my mom and I were living with my grandmother after her and my dad split. While I was too young to remember a lot of the specifics, I do have some core memories that were born during this time. For one, it was during this time I developed my love for the Ninja Turtles. The 1980s cartoon was going strong, and I spent most of my time watching episodes. Does anyone remember those Burger King Kids Club VHS tapes with episodes of the Turtles on them? I owned every single one of them, and I would watch them until the VHS tapes practically disintegrated. During this time with my grandparents is when I discovered my love for root beer and cream soda as well. Oh, and this is the time I discovered that ramen noodle soup was the best soup on the planet, especially when you eat it with peanut butter and jelly. You know what I used to do and still do to this day? I'd cut my PB&J diagonally, and I would dip that thing into my ramen noodle broth. Every time I bring this up to someone, they look at me like I'm some sort of psychopath, but trust me on this. It has to be the chicken-flavored noodles, though. Everything else I've tried tastes like crap, but if you're feeling adventurous, dip your PB&J in chicken-flavored ramen. It is life-changing, seriously. Anyway, back on task. Somewhere along the line, an original Nintendo appeared in the home, and that little gray box would slowly start to change everything for me. I don't remember playing it a ton, but I played the usual gems. Super Mario Bros. Was one, of course, and so was Duck Hunt. I think I've mentioned this in a past episode somewhere, but one of my favorite memories was when my grandfather would grab me by the ankles and pull me back from the TV whenever I would scooch just a little too close. After a while, I got my hands on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES and absolutely loved that game for a while as well. Even though I wasn't really good enough to get past that electric seaweed part, I still had a blast, especially because of my love for the turtles at that point in my life. We had some other games too, like WWF WrestleMania, one of the worst games I've probably ever played. Not that I knew that as a kid, it was one of only a few games that we had, so when I was bored, I did my best to make that turd shine. At some point during my life, at my stint at Grandma's house, I learned about Nintendo Power Magazine. Now, I can't remember how, but all I knew is I wanted a subscription. I ended up getting one for Christmas one year, and from that point on, with every issue of Nintendo Power, the world of gaming really opened up to me. Now, here's where my memory gets a little fuzzy. I'm pretty sure it was because of Nintendo Power, but somewhere over the next few years, I remember coming into possession of my very first Nintendo Player's Guide. That Player's Guide was all about Super Metroid on the beautiful Super Nintendo Entertainment System. From what I remember, there are a bunch of Player's Guides out there. I remember seeing one for Donkey Kong Country, one for A Link to the Past, another one for Link's Awakening, and even one for Mario Paint. But where I saw, or even how I came into possession of the Super Metroid Guide, I have no frickin' idea. I never even owned Super Metroid growing up either. But man, I do remember reading that guide from cover to cover on more than one occasion. The artwork was captivating, the descriptions of all the game's power-ups were awesome, and I loved pretending I was playing the game through all the maps that were laid out on all the pages. I could just imagine how it felt to explore the game and discover each and every one of its secrets. But alas, that never came to be. There was a point where I rented the game, and one of the save slots on the cartridge that I had was at the very end of the game, so I would repeatedly finish the game and partake in the awesome ending, but I never really played the game from start to finish. Eventually, our Super Nintendo would take a back seat to the Sony PlayStation, and the rest was history for me. As time went on, Super Metroid seemingly stood the test of time and continued to be a game that would come up over and over again with labels such as innovative, unique, revolutionary, and just plain fun. But I was knee-deep in the 5th generation of gaming hardware, and I was not looking back. Thanks to this podcast and so many of you, that has finally changed. I can now count myself as part of the many who have played Super Metroid and completed it. It took me 39 years after appearing on this planet, but I can finally put this one on my gaming resume. But as I was playing through this game, I had one single question that I wanted to answer. After about 30 years of this game existing, is it really as good as people claim it is? Especially when played for the first time today in 2024. I had to know. Is Super Metroid deserving of all its accolades, or has it just been elevated due to nostalgia and how it helped create the Metroidvania genre of games? Maybe people liked it so much because all they had to play as a kid was this game, and it's all based on personal bias and not so much about the game itself. But even as a kid having nothing but a strategy guide to reference, I saw the genius in Super Metroid. Still, I was very excited to finally play this game, and I am equally as excited to let you know what I came away with. So, in order to answer all of these hard-hitting questions, we're going to have to go deep on this one, just like taking that long elevator ride straight to Norfair. Oh, and real quick, a word on spoilers. This game doesn't really have that revolutionary of a plot, and it's been out since 1994. Everything is on the table in this episode, and while I'm not really going to spoil much, I don't think, I will be talking about the ending sequence in detail. So if you somehow have not played this game before and you don't want that spoiled for you, go play Super Metroid and then come on back. I have to imagine I was the last person on the planet to play this game, so I assume we're all good, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, it's time we start peeling back the layers of Super Metroid and see exactly what it is that we're working with. So, what is this game? Super Metroid is a side-scrolling action-adventure game where players take control of Samus Aran, a galactic bounty hunter. The game is actually the third in the Metroid series, and where the series really found its stride. The thing that really made Super Metroid special was its approach to gameplay. The world that the player is dropped into is more or less open-ended, and you're free to explore in whatever order you want. While you do have a singular overarching objective, that's all you know, and that's what you're driving to. Your mission is simply to find and recover the last Metroid in existence. The game doesn't tell you where it is or where you need to go. It's up to you as the player to explore the game world and discover where you need to go on your own, all while battling many alien creatures who don't really care to have you on their planet. Now, while it sounds like you can go anywhere, anytime you want, and you sort of can, you will come across some locked doors or other obstacles that you won't be able to get through right away. You'll need to find the right equipment or ability upgrades in order to progress through the game, and this is where Super Metroid really shines. At its core, it's really a game about exploration and discovery, and half the fun is searching for that thing you need in order to open up more parts of the game world. But expanding upon that, you're not just looking for a random MacGuffin to drive the plot forward. The things you find, new abilities, weapons, or equipment, all add to the gameplay experience by allowing you as the player to explore further and become more effective in combat. You're literally leveling up as you go and slowly conquer the game world. You're not just gathering things and checking boxes here. Now, I'd like to think that everything I just said makes sense, especially to those who have played the game. That idea is what I'm going to speak to a lot this episode, but before we really dive into that portion of the discussion, we need to set the stage. Let's grab the game cartridge and slot that baby into our Super Nintendo system. Actually, just 1 second. Perfect, nice and clean. And to that one person who messaged me and said,
"Blowing in the cartridge is actually harmful over time,"
I appreciate the insight, but let me have this moment, okay? We all did it. We still do it. This is happening. There we go. Anywho, with that out of the way, let's power up Super Metroid. As soon as the game comes on screen, ominous music starts to play. In red, we see the year 1994 displayed on screen. Sounds from an unknown creature can be heard. We're then shown a pixelated close-up of what looks to be a laboratory of some kind. Something appears on the floor, but we can't quite make out what it is. The word Nintendo appears in red letters, and a moment later the word Presents appears. As we see more flashes of the lab, it's clear what's on the floor. bodies. Dead bodies. Metroid 3 appears on screen in red letters. The atmosphere is tense, and it all comes to a head when we see what's at the center of it all. Inside a containment tube, we see a little green organism. The last Metroid. At this point, the game's title screen appears at the top of the screen. Super Metroid. Now, if you think that opening was cool, just you wait, dear listener. Super Metroid has one of my favorite opening sections in a video game, and we'll be diving in soon enough. Now, while there's no prompt on screen, pressing start from here will get things moving, so let's do that now. After pressing start, the screen is replaced with a view of 3 save slots. If this is your first time playing the game, all the save slots will probably be empty and display the words "no data" next to them. Feel free to pick whichever one you want, and once you do, we're given a few more options. You have a controller setting mode where you can map all of your abilities and actions to specific buttons on the SNES controller, which is very useful. There's also a special setting mode that tweaks a few other gameplay features. I didn't mess with this on my initial playthrough at all, but you can tweak things like having your special weapon automatically deselect itself when you're moving to a new area, and you can toggle on and off the ability to moonwalk. Basically, moonwalking is the ability to fire on your enemy and move backwards without having Samus turn around. Really, it's just walking backwards and shooting. I didn't play with this feature on, but I have heard that some of you live and die by this technique. I am genuinely curious to try it out one day though. Anyway, once the game's settings are to your liking, go ahead and start the game. From here, the game is going to start us off by giving us a brief story recap up to this point in the Metroid franchise. While the instruction manual of Super Metroid does go into much more detail, this opening is perfect for setting the stage, so do not worry about going back to the previous Metroid games in order to understand what's going on here. The story recap begins, amazingly, with some random person's voiceover.
The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
Ew, that is so cringy to listen to today, but I have to imagine hearing actual spoken words coming out of your TV speakers back in '94 was a momentous experience for some. Anyway, from here, we're shown an image of Samus, the game's protagonist, and through some text on screen, she'll start recapping things for us.
I first battled the Metroids on planet Zebes. It was there that I foiled the plans of the space pirate leader Mother Brain to use the creatures to attack galactic civilization.
In a black and white flashback, we're shown a reenactment of when Samus first battled and defeated the evil Mother Brain in the first Metroid game.
I next fought the Metroids on their homeworld, SR-388. I completely eradicated them except for a larva, which, after hatching, followed me like a confused child.
Another black and white flashback shows this on screen for us as well, and we can see Samus thinking about shooting the little guy in his non-face, but ultimately runs off with the little creature in tow.
I personally delivered it to the Galactic Research Station at Ceres so scientists could study its energy-producing qualities.
Next, we see Samus shaking the hand of a Dr. Light-looking scientist who has the Metroid safely stowed away in a capsule underneath his arm.
The scientists' findings were astounding. They discovered that the powers of the Metroid might be harnessed for the good of civilization.
Next, we see a black and white shot of the laboratory, presumably from the opening of the game, where the Metroid is in the center of the room in its capsule being studied by a team of scientists.
Satisfied that all was well, I left the station to seek a new bounty to hunt. But I had hardly gone beyond the asteroid belt when I picked up a distress call. Ceres Station was under attack.
In a flash, we're shown Samus's ship as it speeds towards the space colony, unsure of what dangers might await her. Now, really quick before we continue, I first started playing this game on my Nintendo Switch using their Nintendo Online service. I had a pair of decent quality headphones on, and I have to say, the sound of Samus's ship flying through space sounded absolutely amazing. The overall sound design of Super Metroid absolutely smashed my expectations. From the dark ambience of the upcoming space station section, the thunderclaps on the surface of planet Zebes, to the satisfying explosion of a mini-bomb or missile. Do yourself a favor, if you play this game in the future, isolate yourself and listen to this game with a good set of headphones. You will thank me later. After the screen fades to black, Samus boards the space station. We can see Samus descending an elevator, and once it comes to a stop, control is given to the player for the first time. Alright, bounty hunters, we need to figure out what caused the distress call and make sure that everyone is alright. The moment we enter the space station, it's immediately clear that something is wrong. The space station is shrouded in a misty blue hue, and the music playing is ominous and foreboding. Now, before we get going, a quick word on a couple things that we can see on screen. First, we have an energy readout on the upper left. It's just a numerical value at the moment, which reads 99. Think of those as your hit points. If Samus takes any damage to herself via an enemy or an environmental hazard, her energy will decrease. If that number reaches 0, Samus will fall and your game will be over. Defeated enemies have a chance to drop items that will restore your energy, but we'll touch on that a little later. At the top right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a mini-map. It's a 3x5 grid, and your location is always in the center. The map fills out as you explore an area, but you do have the ability to find a map of an area if you're lucky enough to come across it. As you explore, you're going to be referring to your map often, I can guarantee that. For now though, there's not too much when it comes to exploring the immediate area we're in, so we'll touch more on the map a little later as well. Alright, that's it for the HUD elements, it's time to get moving. Using the directional pad, you can move Samus around on screen. The elevator platform that we're on is just that, a platform. We see two smaller platforms below us, so let's hold our D-pad to the right and drop down to the platform below. Good. Looks like we can only go down this way by dropping onto another platform, so let's keep heading down. Nice. At the bottom of the room that we're in, there's a door to our right. Moving next to it causes the door to automatically open for us. Nice. Let's move through to the next room. Now, the next room is fairly wide open, so let's move to the right. As we move forward, we come across a raised portion of the floor. We don't automatically step onto it, so we'll have to jump. Pressing the jump button will have Samus, well, jump. And while this is just a way for you to jump for the very first time and see how that works, I really encourage you to take some time in this room and get used to how Samus jumps around. While she's in the air, Samus is kinda floaty, almost as if the gravity isn't as strong as you would think it should be. While you're running, if you jump with Samus, she'll curl herself into a ball and flip end over end until she lands on her feet. While she's in the air like this, you can move her around a little bit and be kind of precise with where she lands. Now, if you're not moving and you decide to jump up, Samus will still jump, but she won't do any of the cool flips. You can maneuver her in the air like this, but she won't move nearly as far this way. One benefit of jumping like this is that Samus can fire her arm cannon in the air if she's not spinning. Another benefit is you'll have a little bit more precise control when you're doing some precise platforming. It'll make more sense as we play the game, but if you've never played Super Metroid before, jump around in this room and get a bearing on how it all works. It will absolutely help, take it from me. Okay, let's keep moving. As we move into the next room from here, we're taken to an area with a few staircases going down. Nothing to do here except keep moving down, where the next door is eagerly awaiting us. Once we pass through this door, we're taken to the laboratory room that we saw in the opening title sequence. A red-headed female scientist is sprawled out on the floor, but what's more concerning is what we see when we move deeper into the room. Or more precisely, what we don't see. The capsule where the Metroid was being housed has been destroyed, and the Metroid is missing. It sure stinks like space pirates in here all of a sudden, doesn't it? Either way, this is not good, and it is almost guaranteed that danger is still lurking. We got back to the space station pretty quick after hearing its distress call, so I can almost guarantee that trouble is still out there. Regardless, we need to push forward. After going through a long hallway, we come into a room. The ambient music of the space colony has gone silent all of a sudden, and all is quiet. From the doorway, we drop down to the floor below. Looking ahead, we see pretty quickly that we are not alone. The Metroid, in its glass capsule, is sitting in the middle of the floor. That's strange. When we move towards the Metroid, we find that we can't pick it up or interact with it in any way. At this moment, however, something shimmers in the background. Something almost golden. All at once, we see Ridley fade into the foreground. Ridley is a winged, dragon-looking alien who happens to be one of Mother Brain's highest-ranking commanders. If the space pirates are here, it's clear they mean to capture the Metroid and try to use it for their evil purposes. We cannot let that happen. Ridley, with one monstrous claw on the Metroid capsule, lets out a demonic screech. At this point, while it's not inherently obvious, control has returned to the player. This is as good a time as any to use that arm cannon Samus has and stop Ridley from escaping. Unless you've remapped the controls, pressing X on your controller will fire your arm cannon. It's a semi-automatic-ish type of cannon, so you'll have to press the button each time you want to fire. Doing so will have Samus shoot in the direction that she's facing. While Ridley is sitting there looking cocky, let's give him a few arm cannon blasts. Nice, good hits. Anytime an enemy takes damage, they'll blink white for a split second. At this point, Ridley decides to take to the air, and he starts to use his wings to float upwards. Now, shooting airborne enemies can be a little tough, but you have a couple of options. First, you can jump in place and fire your cannon, or you can have Samus angle her cannon arm upwards at a 45-degree angle. To do that, just press and hold the right shoulder button, Samus will angle up her cannon, and then you can commence firing. There you go, nothing to it. The left shoulder button will have you angle your arm towards the ground, and if you hold both of them together, Samus will actually aim straight up. This can be done while jumping, so if you're really looking to become a combat master, you'll want to master aerial combat using these resources. Even though you have some pretty good mobility to start, Samus's cannon isn't all that strong to start with, and Ridley can easily put a beating on you here. He'll either fly directly into you, shoot fireballs at you, or whack you with its razor-sharp tail. When you do take damage, your energy will decrease. If your energy happens to drop too low, however, the game will let you know that you're in danger of perishing by sounding off a warning alarm. I usually find low health klaxons absolutely annoying in most video games, but this one is not too bad. It's just a low enough tone that it isn't too grating on the senses. If you want a chance at actually taking Ridley down in this section of the game, do your absolute best to avoid his tail. It does the most damage in a single hit from what I've noticed. Now, this fight will end one of two ways. If you're a space bounty hunter master ninja, you'll pump Ridley full of enough holes that he'll actually drop the Metroid capsule, but he'll find a way to grab it before he flies off and escapes. If Ridley gets the upper hand and damages you enough to the point where your low health alarm starts to go off, Ridley just says screw you and flies straight away anyway. The only real difference here is he just doesn't drop the capsule first. Assuming you're going to have the same experience I did, you'll get your ass handed to you and watch Ridley fly away with what I assume is a stupid shit-eating grin on his face. Don't worry though, this needs to happen for the rest of the plot and the game to happen. It is a necessary evil. However, on his way out, Ridley leaves us with a nasty surprise. The room starts to shake and an emergency siren blares. On screen, we see the words, "Emergency! Self-destruct sequence activated. Evacuate colony immediately." Holy crap, we're only a few minutes into this game, and things have escalated quite quickly. On screen, a timer appears. We have 1 minute to get the hell out of here. We need to get moving, so let's go. All we need to do is backtrack to where we started, so it shouldn't be too bad. We just need to keep moving. Now, here's a cool trick I didn't quite figure out until well into my initial playthrough because I didn't bother looking at the control scheme. While Samus is technically running when you move her around normally, holding down the B button on the controller will make Samus run faster. This is great for the few straightaways in front of us. As we move back the way we came, the murky blue background and atmosphere of the colony is replaced with a slightly red hue, and the environment starts to shake. We don't have any enemies to fight on our way out, but as things heat up, there will be bursts of steam coming out of the walls and floor that can harm us if we touch it. It won't reduce our energy, but the knockback is enough to throw us backwards and slow us down. And with only a single minute to get the hell out of Dodge, we need to avoid these distractions as much as possible. When we get back to the wide open room, the one we were learning how to jump in, we can see parts of the ceiling start to fall down as well. The time limit to our destruction has moved under our minimap. About 37 seconds left to go. We are moving, people, let's keep going. When we finally reach the final vertical corridor, the one we drop down through, an explosion dramatically seals the door behind us. Spurts of white steam are flowing out of practically every crack in the foundation. What's worse, the entire room starts to literally sway back and forth. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe this is the power of the Super Nintendo using Mode 7 to make the background move around like this. It is incredibly awesome to see, but it can be a little disorienting, which I'm sure is the point. Either way, we need to keep focused and we need to keep jumping up to each platform to eventually get to the elevator. Be careful though, the blasts of steam are ruthless. You do not want to fall all the way back down to the bottom of the room. That would be catastrophic. Ah, crap, took a hit. Steady. Ah, damn it, come on. 20 seconds, we can do this, just one at a time. Keep moving, but time your jumps carefully. Come on, there, perfect. There's the elevator platform. Just one more jump and... awesome! We made it! As soon as we land on the elevator platform, the timer stops and the screen fades to black. From space, we can see the space colony on the verge of destruction as small explosions ripple across the surface. Just as it explodes, we see Samus escaping in her ship at the last moment. Whew, we made it. How was that for an opening, huh? Before we move on, I have to say, if I ever did a list of my favorite video game opening segments, Super Metroid would be on that list for sure. There was just something about the dark and foreboding atmosphere to start and the frantic escape sequence to cap it all off. It just really set the stage for me. And this is coming from a guy who does not really care for the quote-unquote escape sequences in games. Not that I have anything to really base this off of, but I can't think of any other SNES game that has an opener that matches the spectacle of Super Metroid. The opening really set the stage and got the player vested in what's to come. If this is how the game starts, I couldn't wait to see what happened next. With the last Metroid stolen, it's only obvious what comes next. The space pirates are most likely going to try and use it like they did originally and harness the power of the Metroid for evil. This means Samus needs to head to their base and put a stop to them once and for all. That's right, we're heading back to where it all started for the series. Planet Zebes. As we land on Zebes, we're treated with a view of Samus's ship from the front. The planet's surface is a desolate place. The overcast sky is ominous and rain is falling pretty hard. Thunder crashes overhead and it's clear that we're not getting any sort of warm welcome here. When Samus's ship makes it to the ground, it actually hovers just above it. The top of the ship opens up, and Samus emerges from the interior. After the door to the ship closes, control is given to the player. This is where the game truly begins, and it's up to us now to find the missing Metroid before the space pirates have time to realize their plans with it. But the question here is, where do we go and where do we even start? That right there is the beauty of Super Metroid. There is no roadmap, no objective marker. It's up to us to explore the planet and figure it all out on our own. And that is exactly what we're going to do. As we check out a little bit of Planet Zebes, we'll touch on some more of the game's mechanics and what to expect along the way. After that, we'll touch on some of my favorite power-ups, check in with some interesting green aliens as they teach us a few things, and we'll cap our journey off by highlighting the incredible ending. Sound good to you all? Perfect, let's get going. Let's start off by heading to the right of the screen. As we move, we'll quickly come across a dead end. Pay attention to what's clogging the passageway here. These dirt blocks are a great example of obstacles that can be destroyed if you have the right weapon or ability. We can't destroy this obstruction right now, but this is a classic example of a point where you want to make a mental note of. As you acquire new weapons and abilities, you'll eventually come across the thing that you need to destroy this obstruction. Now, this is actually a good time to mention one thing about Super Metroid that I didn't really care for. And that's trying to keep track of what obstruction was where and what item I needed to surpass it. Now, let me be 110% clear. That's a personal gripe and nothing against the game or its design. While the game's map is useful in that I can just look at it and see that this area over here is incomplete and I need to just come back and check it out, I found myself backtracking to areas a lot and just walking around aimlessly until I rediscovered an obstacle that I now have the means to work through. In my initial 6-hour playthrough, I felt like I used about 2 of those hours just figuring out where the hell I needed to go. In other games where you find specific keys or items that serve a specific purpose, it was much easier to know that I needed to head to that one door or go to that one specific location due to a picture or a marking that matches the item that I have in hand. But again, this is a me problem. Because really, part of the magic of this game is discovering how to interact with things you don't know you could interact with once you have the right item or you learn the right technique. Anyway, rant over. Since we can't go right, let's turn around and head to the left. Once we get as far as we can go, we'll come across a door. Now, the doors on planet Zebes aren't as accommodating as those on the space colony. They do not open automatically. You have to shoot them open, which is fine, but not all doors open with Samus's arm cannon. Blue doors, like the one that's in front of us right now, will open when blasted with pretty much anything, so nothing to really worry about here. Now, there are several different colored doors that we'll find that only open up when hit with a specific weapon. Red doors, for instance, need to be hit with 5 missiles before they'll open. A green door takes a single super missile. Yellow doors need a blast from a power bomb, and the metal doors you come across will only open when a specific condition is met, which is most commonly, kill all the enemies in the room. This is another example of the gear gating system where you have to have the right equipment in order to move forward. For us though, this blue door in front of us is no match for us now, so let's open it up and proceed. On the other side, we're now in an interior cave location. As we move forward, there's an incline in the terrain we need to jump on, but what we'll probably notice immediately is the small path underneath that's only about as high as Samus's knees. Obstructing that little path are blocks that look like the breakable blocks that we saw outside. Even if we could destroy them though, Samus can't crouch down far enough to enter that tight space. If only we could, morph. Into a ball, perhaps. That would allow us passage below. For now, though, we just need to keep moving to the left. After a bit of time passes, we'll find ourselves dropping down a long vertical corridor. There's small platforms here and there, but this corridor seemingly goes down forever. A light mist seems to be floating around, and it feels like this area of the planet hasn't been disturbed in quite some time. Once we get to the bottom of the corridor and proceed through the door on the right, veterans of the first game, or those of you who paid attention during the opening segment, will know exactly where we are. Just past the door is the exploded capsule that used to house Mother Brain, and it was the location where Samus took her on in the original game. Even though I never played the original Metroid, I felt a bit in awe in this room. I certainly appreciated the call-out and the respect for the original game here, and that's further showcased in a few rooms that are coming up ahead of us. After taking an elevator further down, the area we find ourselves in looks very blue and almost purposefully rendered in a graphical style that looks just like the original NES game. I'm making an assumption here, but I think this area was an actual area in the original game. Once we get off the elevator and hang a left, we'll be forced to jump over a few platforms. Once we do, we'll drop into a chamber. In the center of this chamber is a pedestal that has a glowing red ball on it, placed there with the utmost care and reverence, it seems. Regardless of where it came from, it looks important, so let's see if we can grab it. Once we jump up and touch the item, we collect it. And the words Morphing Ball pop on screen. This item will be the first of many that we'll find along our journey. With the Morphing Ball power-up in our possession, we can now crouch down and down again to have Samus turn into a little ball about the quarter of her overall size and roll around. Now, if you're thinking what I was thinking when I first got the Morph Ball, my first thought after getting this power-up was I eventually wanted to go back to the area above and see if we could destroy those little blocks in the middle of that little passageway and use the Morph Ball to descend further down. Now this right here, to me, is the absolute best part of this entire game. It's one thing to find an item and either gain a new way to fight the enemy or a unique way to traverse the environment, but it's learning how to use these new items and abilities in order to become more effective in combat, or how to move forward into new areas that really cements this game as one of the greats. The game does not hold your hand. While some items you pick up come with a quick, press this button to do this thing wall of text, the game doesn't specifically tell you how to use your item the most effective way or where you need to use this item in order to progress. That right there is the beauty of it all. It's really up to you to figure out what you need to do with the tools that you have and how you can use that knowledge you gain to move forward. The best part of my experience was when I found a new item, and now I'm backtracking to older areas to see if obstacles that were in my way before can be overcome now. But that's not where it all ends either. Planet Zebes is rife with all sorts of secrets too. There can be areas of the floor or ceiling that will only crumble when you blast them with a power bomb, or maybe there's parts of the environment that you could only move through if you had the ability to jump while using the morphing ball. When I finished my first playthrough, I had somewhere around 63% of all items collected, and I thought I had done a pretty decent job of poking around fairly thoroughly. Clearly there's much more to be found, and that's honestly very exciting to me. While Super Metroid does a great job creating an atmosphere of isolation and constant danger, there was still some wonder to be had as I stumbled across something I missed earlier, or tried using a new item in a different area and seeing some awesome results that I wasn't expecting. Now, in my opinion, the game does run the risk of becoming very tedious at this point if all you're doing is going room to room and trying to blast things open with missiles or power bombs and not finding anything. It can be kind of repetitive. But even despite this, I have to imagine so many people hold this game in such high regard because of all the secrets and all the things that they could spend time finding. I can imagine kids just locking themselves away and spending hours upon hours discovering all that this game has to offer. Even if the item that you discovered was just another 5 missiles that you could carry and add to your overall total, it all felt worth it. Especially when you discovered things that you could do that didn't require a specific ability or item to unlock. What do I mean by that sentence? Well, allow me to highlight one of my absolute favorite parts of this whole game. And it involves a few little green alien creatures. I believe it's in the area of Zebes called Brinstar, but you'll come across 2 alien species that, thankfully, don't want to kill you and harvest your organs. It's not fairly obvious at first, but these little aliens are going to teach you some awesome skills that will help you a ton on your adventure. First, we have the ostrich-looking creature known as the Dachola. At least that's what my player's guide calls them, and who knows if I'm pronouncing that right anyway. The Dachola lives in this long corridor, and when you run to the other end of it, you'll see a long shaft upwards that seems to go on forever. There aren't any platforms to jump up on or anything that you can use to climb. Plus, the corridor is extremely wide too. I remember being confused and I started to go back the way I came, thinking, how the hell would I even climb such a long corridor? But that's when I noticed something. In this area, the Dachola is running at full speed down the corridor. That's cool, I guess. But it wasn't until I kept pace with the little ostrich that I realized what was going on. You see, at this point in the game, I had a power-up called the Speed Booster. This allowed me to run at blazing fast speeds while dashing, and would even allow me to disintegrate some obstacles and enemies too. The Dachola was running so fast that I had to use my Speed Booster in order to keep up. Once it and I reached the end of the corridor, it would crouch, flash for a moment, and then jump way up through the corridor. Once I saw that, I immediately put 2 and 2 together. I'll bet I could do the same thing, I thought to myself. So I went back to the start of the corridor, speed boosted all the way to the end, and crouched right when I got to the wall. Sure enough, Samus started flashing. Once I pressed the jump button, she shot straight up to the very top of the area. It was awesome. I read somewhere that this technique was originally called the super jump, but later became known as the shine spark. Neat. Elsewhere on Brinstar, you come across a similar type of situation. A corridor that dead ends into a long vertical shaft upwards. Only this time, in order to move up the shaft, you had to learn a technique from the furry Edicoons. 3 little green fuzzy elf-looking creatures. Just like with the ostrich that I just mentioned, you had to watch these little guys carefully. They would actually climb up the vertical shaft by wall jumping. They would jump onto one wall, turn around, and jump towards the opposite wall. Using this technique, they would make it all the way to the top of the shaft. There was no room to do a shine spark here, so we had to learn how to wall jump. Now, let me get this gripe out of the way so we can get back to the good stuff. Wall jumping in Super Metroid sucks. It fucking sucks, and I know plenty of you that have reached out to me and said things like,
"Just stick with it, you'll get it."
No! I am not good at wall jumping. I don't want to be good at wall jumping. Take it back. I don't want it. Yeah. It just requires you to spin jump towards a wall, press the opposite direction you want to jump in, but you can't jump again right away. You have to wait a half a heartbeat, then you can jump. It was just frustrating for me. Probably because I don't have as much patience as I used to, but still. Anytime I had to wall jump anywhere, I was not happy about it. There was a part in a section called Merida, whatever, that I struggled with for about 20 minutes. My fingers hurt, I was getting upset, and I just wanted to morph ball into the fetal position and cry myself to sleep. Looking back, I don't think I even needed to wall jump to get up there. I probably could have gotten up there another way, but still. Other 2D platformers did wall jumping so much better than Super Metroid. Speaking of, I think Batman on the NES is probably my favorite way to wall jump. Anyway, while I didn't personally enjoy wall jumping, let's circle back to what is truly incredible about the Shine Spark and wall jumping. And that's the fact that you can do these abilities at any time without having to be taught by these little green alien things. Lots of games, especially modern ones, don't allow you to perform a specific action until you unlock it by spending skill points or acquiring a specific item or equipment piece. The Shine Spark and wall jumping are 2 techniques you can always do so long as you know the steps to take. Further, when the game uses these creatures to teach these techniques to you, you're not given any tutorial or button prompts. You have to watch their actions and mimic them as best you can. Because of that, learning these techniques makes them that much more impactful to the player because you discovered a secret within yourself. It is genius game design. If you happen to figure out how to do these things before beating your furry green alien friends, all the better. You can get a leg up on some areas of the game, and that in and of itself is its own reward for your ingenuity. Out of all the cool items and things that you can collect in this game, I genuinely enjoyed learning how to wall jump and learning how to perform a Shine Spark. Which brings me to something else I thought was awesome. The wall jump and Shine Spark aren't the only secret techniques in this game. Granted, I had to look some of these up, but did you know, once you have the charge beam and the ability to drop bombs with the morphing ball, that you can drop 5 bombs at once by charging your main attack and then just rolling into a little ball? There's also the ice bomb technique. If you have the ice beam and the charge beam equipped, a power bomb in your arsenal and selected, charging your main weapon will throw out 4 ice balls that will surround you. How about this one? Does anyone listening know about the crystal flash technique? I only knew this existed thanks to my player's guide. This secret technique isn't only cool, it can be an absolute lifesaver, and I actually used this one in my own playthrough. To pull off the Crystal Flash, you need to have 10 regular missiles, 10 super missiles, and 11 power bombs on hand. If you happen to have any reserve tanks that you use for health, those need to be empty, and your overall energy needs to be 50 or less. Basically, you need to be near death. To initiate the Crystal Flash, first you need to select the power bomb and morph into a ball. Then, you need to hold down the L and R shoulder buttons as well as down on the directional pad. Once you do this, hold down the button you use to fire Samus's main arm cannon. Keep holding these down, and after the power bomb detonates, Samus will be engulfed in a white spherical light. She'll lose 10 missiles, 10 super missiles, and 10 power bombs, but this technique should completely heal Samus. It's a fantastic trade-off if you're deep into enemy territory and you're not near a save point. I really appreciate Super Metroid for these secret techniques. Whether you discover them on your own or by looking them up, they add yet another layer to the game that really enhances the overall experience. I can only imagine some kid back in the day figuring some of these out and then telling all their friends what they learned at the playground at recess. Good times. Before we end this episode, we have to talk about some of the game's awesome items and pieces of equipment that you find along the way. I don't want to spend too much time here since I think most of you listening probably already know about a ton of these, but I did want to share my thoughts on a few. When I was reading the player's guide growing up, I was amazed at how many items and weapons there were in this game. The list along with their descriptions took up 2 whole pages of the player's guide. Missiles and super missiles were Samus's bread and butter weapons. While they were limited by however many you had on hand at the moment, they were much more useful than Samus's starting arm cannon. And the best part, they fired however fast you pressed the button on your controller, so it was quite satisfying just unloading on an enemy. The charge beam made Samus's regular weapon a little bit more practical. Holding the fire button would charge up a shot, and releasing it would have it let loose on the enemy. Personally, I usually just used a missile more so than actually charging up a shot, but they still can be very effective. The ice beam was another cool upgrade. Get it? Cool because it's cold? Anyway, the ice beam has the potential to freeze some enemies in place, allowing you to use them as platforms. While this seems like a nice-to-have feature, it's actually essential to progress in some areas. It added a nice change to the overall combat experience, but my favorite weapon upgrade was the plasma beam. Its sheer power is enough to wreck most things, and it just feels awesome to use. And it cuts through multiple enemies, if I remember right. Other than weapons, Samus has some utility-type items that she can grab. For a while, one of my favorites was the grapple beam. This beam acted like a grappling hook, and you could attach it to certain types of blocks and even to certain enemies. Once attached, you could make Samus swing back and forth, and at the last moment, she'd let go and she'd go flying, usually towards areas that she wouldn't have been able to access otherwise. It's a simple concept and not at all interesting, really, but I really loved having to push the D-pad back and forth in order to get Samus's momentum built up before letting her fly. There's also an item called the X-ray scope that I almost missed out on completely. Using this item will emit a small cone of light out of Samus's helmet, and you can see if parts of the room that you're in are destructible or hiding secrets. A fantastic tool, to be sure, but I didn't use it a ton since I found it so late in the game. I am sure there were kids back in the day X-raying every single pixel in this game in order to find the next hidden thing. But after fully playing the game and looking back on my experience as a whole, my absolute favorite ability has to be the screw attack. When you have the screw attack and you do a spin jump, Samus turns into this supercharged buzzsaw looking thing. Virtually any enemy Samus touches while in screw attack mode will be tore up into tiny bits and pieces. It is glorious. And the screw attack gets even cooler if you have an item called the space jump equipped. When you're in a spin jump, pressing jump again will allow Samus to sort of jump again while in midair when she has the space jump equipped. And this effectively allows her to somersault all over the damn place and reach most any inaccessible area. While you're floating around like this and you're in full-on screw attack mode, all your enemies will be cowering before you as you rip them to shreds. It really made the game fun, and by the time you have both of these abilities, you've spent a good portion of the game battling enemies using conventional weaponry. Now, the tables can be turned, and it's absolutely something you feel like you've earned, as opposed to just another overpowered item. Which leads me to a point I think I made when I talked about Metroid Zero Mission in one of our early episodes. The one thing that I will always appreciate about this type of game genre is growing along with the character that I'm playing as. I may not be going on an emotional journey with Samus or anything, but she becomes stronger and more versatile as she collects more items and equipment. The same holds true for me as the player. Every new item or technique adds some new layer to the overall experience and makes me feel just a little bit more powerful. By the end of the game, I went from feeling like a fledgling newbie to a fully fledged bounty hunter who was molded through fire and battle-hardened. And any game that makes you feel a sense of progression and growth like this is doing it right. So, with everything that we've already covered, I feel like there's still so much to discover and discuss when it comes to Super Metroid that we'd almost need another episode to touch on it all. Overall, though, I really enjoyed my experience with this game, having played it for the first time recently. There were some things that frustrated me about this game, though. I wish the map was better about calling out obstacles that needed a specific item to circumvent. I didn't feel like jumping was as crisp and responsive as people made it out to be, and I did not enjoy wall jumping in the slightest if my rant earlier was not clear enough. Worst of all, I hated it when I would find myself lost as to what I needed to do next, and the way forward was not obvious to me. I know that's part of the overall experience, and I can appreciate that, but I found myself sitting down with this game and ending my session having made no progress at all at times since I still didn't know where I needed to go by the end of my session. Back in the day, when we had nothing but time to game, I would probably not bat an eye to this. But today, as an adult with responsibilities, a full-time job, and kids I need to keep alive, the time I lost wandering around genuinely frustrated me. And it didn't help that last month has been one of the most stressful that I've experienced at my adult job in the 10 years that I've been working there. I basically played this game in a poor mood most of the time, and I found myself easily agitated at a lot of little things. But now that I've had time to digest my experience and really look at it at a high level, I can't help but feel accomplished and genuinely satisfied. While I don't think Super Metroid is my absolute favorite game of all time now or anything, I absolutely see the genius and I absolutely had a great time with this one. The hype is real, and now I understand why this game is considered a must-play. Even if you find yourself needing to use a guide, which I'm proud to say I only did once when I was truly lost, the gameplay experience is solid throughout this entire journey. I never felt bored, and I never felt like playing was a chore. Except for that time that I was lost, but I digress. So if you haven't played this game before, certainly give it a shot. If it's been a while, you owe it to yourself to go back and relive those glory days. For me, though, the one thing that I will always remember is the epic final battle with Mother Brain and how the kindness Samus showed in a single moment helped her to save the day. When the time comes to battle Mother Brain, you'll find her in a glass capsule like the original game, but once you destroy that, Mother Brain transforms into a bipedal giant, standing about as tall as the screen. Samus is locked in a room with her, so all we can do is unload on Mother Brain and hope we do enough damage to take her out once and for all. Obviously, her massive head is her weakness, so we get to work unloading our arsenal. For me, it was a volley of super missiles right to the teeth. Mother Brain will do her best to take you out with a variety of laser projectiles, bombs, and other nasty things. As long as we stay relatively mobile and keep firing on her head, we'll start to wear her down. At this point, Mother Brain decides to step up her game by unleashing a powerful beam attack that, once unleashed, cannot be avoided. Mother Brain shoots a multicolored beam that's so powerful it pins Samus against the back wall. By the time the beam ends, Samus barely has any health left. Samus was hit so hard that no input by the player will bring her back to her feet. She'll struggle, but she'll continue to fall to her knees. Mother Brain almost toys with Samus, shooting a low-power projectile or two at her to whittle her health down even farther. Finally, she rears back and charges up another energy blast, eager to finish Samus off for good. But just before she can unleash the killing blow, the Metroid we came here to save latches onto Mother Brain and starts sapping her of her life force. Mother Brain is brought to her knees and looks to be defeated. At this point, the Metroid, who still seems imprinted on Samus, takes the energy it absorbed from Mother Brain and transfers it to Samus, refilling her energy tanks. But Mother Brain is far from finished. As Samus is being healed, we can see a purple mist coming from Mother Brain's open mouth. Soon, the color returns to her, and she goes back on the offensive. The Metroid shields Samus as Mother Brain unleashes a volley of laser attacks. Clearly wounded, the Metroid floats away, but comes charging back towards Mother Brain. But in the last moment, Mother Brain nails the Metroid with a laser blast. The Metroid, defeated, falls towards Samus. But something happens as the Metroid dies. It seems to have transferred its energy and possibly some of the energy it stole from Mother Brain into Samus. Samus glows the color of a rainbow and slowly gets to her feet. At this point, control returns to the player, and as soon as we fire Samus's main arm cannon, we discover something truly awesome. Samus is now in possession of the Hyper Beam, which shoots a laser blast powerful enough to throw Mother Brain's head back towards the opposite wall. With the Metroid's final act of self-sacrifice, we are given the gift that we need to end this evil once and for all. Mother Brain tries her best to fight back, but the power of the Hyper Beam seals her fate. In no time at all, Mother Brain starts to fall apart, her final death cry, the last we'll ever hear from her. As the rest of Mother Brain's mechanical body falls away, we watch as her head slowly turns to dust. And with that, our journey is finally... son of a bitch. An emergency siren starts going off and a message on screen appears. Time bomb set. Escape immediately. A countdown of 3 minutes appears on screen and a doorway behind us blows open. Well, we all know the drill by now. It's time to get the hell out of here. As soon as we go through the doorway, metal shutters close in front of us. We make short work of those with the hyper beam and then we continue forward. The entire screen is shaking and small explosions are going off all around us. Just how big is this time bomb anyway? We don't have much time to think about it, we just have to keep moving. As we push forward, Samus will encounter space pirate goons who stand in the way of her escape. The hyper beam will make short work of these fools, so keep shooting and keep moving. It can be a little disorienting trying to navigate some of these corridors with all the screen shaking going on, but don't lose your cool. We have come this far, it would be an absolute shame to die at a time like this. Ultimately, the goal here is to get back to Samus's ship, which means we need to go up. The maze-like area we find ourselves in seems like it might be hard to navigate, but it's not that hard to push through. Things get heated though when we start to move upwards. Molten hot lava starts to rise underneath us, so we need to make sure that we're taking our time and making the jumps we need to make in order to keep moving up. Eventually we'll come to a familiar looking vertical corridor. Remember the one that we fell down in the very beginning of the game that was covered in all the old mist? Yes, that's where we're at, so we're already close to where our ship is. By the time we make it to the surface, we can already see the finish line, but there's still something else that we need to do before we leave the planet. Now, I don't know if this is something that we would have figured out in the normal course of gameplay or not, but we have the opportunity to save our green fluffy little alien friends, and since they were so kind to us earlier, I vote we see if we can help them out. But where are they from here? As you make it to the surface, you'll see an area you can go down through using the morph ball. That is where we need to go. Let's see if we can pull this off. How much time do we have? Shit, about 1 minute and 10 seconds. Come on, let's go. There's no time to waste. As we make our way down, we'll find a doorway. I believe this is the passage that we would have used to find our very first power bomb item, if I'm not mistaken. Follow this passage to the very end and then we'll pass through another door. Through that door, we'll find our furry friends trapped in a room that's slowly filling up with lava. If you destroy the back wall, that will give our friends a way out. Perfect, off they go. Where are we at with time? 56 seconds. Alright, let's move it. We need to backtrack the way we came and get back to the surface. When we make it to the outside, everything is shaking. Mini explosions are going off all over the place and steam rises from the ground. It's pretty clear that this time bomb is somehow designed to take out the entire planet at this point. Just keep moving and do not look back. There it is. Samus's ship is right in front of us. As soon as we jump on it and press the down button on the directional pad, the door opens up, and Samus makes her way in. Once the door closes, Samus powers up the ship and it immediately starts to ascend. We're treated to a top-down view of the surface of Zebes, most of which is on fire at this point. We pass through the clouds and eventually we're given a view of the planet from afar. As it radiates a purple hue, we can see the surface of the planet start to crack. All at once, in a flash of blinding light, the planet explodes. Did Samus make it off the planet in time? Psh, of course she did. She has like a dozen more games she needs to be in. We see her ship fly away from the explosion, and if you happen to be paying close enough attention, you'll see a small glint of light flying away from the planet on the right side of the screen. That was our fuzzy alien pals, and they made it out too. Fantastic job. What sort of in-game reward do you get for your efforts? Well, nothing, except knowing that you did the right thing, and I'm sure that counts for something. Nevertheless, we survived and averted a major crisis. Phew, what an amazing end to an amazing game. The operation was completed successfully. See you all next mission. And with another successful mission comes the end of another show, my friends. This has been episode 52 of the Retro Wildlands, Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Thank you very much for tuning into the show today. There is no denying the mark that Super Metroid has left on gaming, and I'm glad I can finally say that I played through it. While I sometimes wonder if I really do like Metroidvania games as much as some of you, I can't deny that I've had a great time with this game, and I absolutely believe it holds up as a must-play game today. Even if I found myself lost sometimes or unsure of where I needed to go, I always appreciated the feeling of starting a game out as a weakling, only to finish as a strong badass. Really, it's that journey of growth that really makes these sorts of games for me, and it's clear to me why so many people hold this game in such high regard. I'm eager to continue my journey into the Metroid franchise, so if there's a game in the series that you'd like to hear me break down next, all you have to do is just let me know. If you like the show and you want to show it and myself some support, please consider subscribing to it on your preferred podcasting platform. For the time being, I don't really have a release schedule for shows, and with my busy work and personal lives, I do my absolute best to make podcasts whenever I have the time. That said, subscribing to the show will let you know the moment I post something new. Now, if you really like the show and want to help spread the word about it, I would appreciate it if you took a moment and dropped us a good review. You can leave the Retro Wildlands a star rating on Spotify, or you could post a written review on iTunes, Podchaser, or Podbean, the platform the show is based out of. Good reviews will help the show circulate a bit more in searches, but more than anything, it'll make me feel like $1,000,000. Nothing motivates me more than knowing you listening really dig what I've been putting together, so it would mean the world to me if you took a few minutes out of your day and left a written review. But don't feel obligated, my friend. Seriously, more than anything, the fact that you're listening to the show right now is much more than I could ever ask for, so above all else, know this. I thank you very much for being here. So, what's coming up next? After all the Nintendo I've fed myself over the last several weeks, I've been itching for something a little bit more mature. While I love me a good romp around the Mushroom Kingdom or a grand adventure around Hyrule, lately I've been feeling a pull towards something a little bit more intense. Something that I can use to de-stress a little. And when I was thinking about what game that might be, a friend casually mentioned a gem to me that he used to play as a kid that I think is going to hit the spot. While it's available on systems like the Nintendo Switch, PS4, Xbox One, or even over on Steam if you wanted to enjoy it today, this game was originally released in 1993 for the MS-DOS computer system. This game was one of the first first-person shooters ever released, and it helped build and define that genre for years to come. And it was one of the first games that I can remember where I could eviscerate my enemies with a chainsaw. I, of course, am talking about Doom. So stay tuned, Wildlanders, and don't forget to subscribe to the show. The next time we take to the gaming wildlands, this expedition is going to hell, and I would absolutely feel privileged and honored if you would join us for this journey. Until then, my friends, my name is Nomad, and you can find me roaming the retro wildlands.